Maggie, it is such a pleasure to meet you. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Abe. It's nice to meet you too.
I am so interested in the way you perceive different art forms, whether it's writing, theater, film, etc., and how you see them all being related to one another.
Wow, that's a big question. I think they're all very different beasts, aren't they? And I think, a cinema audience or a theatre audience or a reader of a book will interact with that narrative in a very, very different way. And of course, you can't overlook the idea of the theatre and cinema being a collective experience, because when you read a book, it's you and the page. So there's a very kind of intimate pairing, between author and reader. But in a theatre or a film, you're, in a cinema, you're all of you are together and you're affected by what other people are seeing and feeling and thinking. And so I felt the first time I saw Hamnet, the film, with a whole audience was at the London Film Festival. I mean, I'd seen it, on my laptop. I'd seen the rushes, the daily rushes, and I'd seen, various edits in tiny little editing suites in London, but I hadn't seen it with 2,000 people, and that was extraordinary. I hadn't really realised what it was like, and even though I know the film really well, obviously, I found it fascinating which bits people laughed at and which bits people cried at, and so it's very, very different. They're all very different.
Well, before we get back to this film, I'm curious about the book and just Shakespeare is such a major figure of history, and I feel like people don't know as much as they should about him. But I also feel like it's an intense project because you know that people are going to be reading very carefully and trying to make
Yeah.
say that they know more than you, etc.
Yeah, I was when I was starting to write the novel, I there was a huge amount of vertigo, definitely, because part of me just kept thinking, the voice of doubt in my head was just saying, "Who the hell writes a novel about Shakespeare? That's a mad idea." And also, yes, like you say, that people are going to be saying, "Well, she's got this wrong and that wrong," and I don't agree with that. I mean, I think there is. I think the enduringly fascinating thing about Shakespeare is that his work is constantly open to new interpretation. There are every season, every month, almost every year, there's somebody saying and doing something different with his plays. And I think that's fantastic. I think he would have loved that. And I think his life is almost the same in a way. Everybody in a way has their own Shakespeare, maybe inside their heads, or, people are going to always be reinventing versions of him, partly because, he although we have a huge body of his work, we don't know that much about him. He's quite an elusive figure, really. Despite the best efforts of the world's excellent Shakespeare scholars, there are still an awful lot about him we don't know, and there are many years gaps in his story that people don't really know where he was or what he was doing. Again, which I love. So, and I think if you're a biographer or an academic, those gaps are really frustrating. But actually, as a novelist, it's a bit of a gift because you can step forward and fill in those gaps with whatever it is you personally happen to, want to say about him. But I think what struck me most is that I always felt that his life in Stratford, his domestic life in a sense, has been completely overlooked by biographers and Shakespeareans and also other filmmakers and writers about him. And I've always thought that's not right. Obviously they were very, very important to him, and people like to. I can see why the focus is on his life in London because that's obviously where he wrote his plays, or well, we don't know actually. It was where he put on his plays and performed them and acted in them. But all the time he was in London, he was, especially towards the end of his life, he was incredibly wealthy. I mean, he was the equivalent of a multimillionaire by the time he retired, and he lived in one-room lodgings in London, and he sent all his money back to Stratford upon Avon, which I think is very indicative of where his heart was. And when he retired from the stage, he could have lived anywhere he wanted, but he went back to live with his wife in Stratford upon Avon, and those two acts, I think, speak volumes about where he felt his home was and where his heart was.
Did you have any apprehension about this becoming a film? Because I know this is the first of your works to be adapted for the screen.
Hmm. I'm not sure apprehension. I mean, certainly, I think you have to go into it not expecting it to be the same as your book. And I think if you do go into it thinking it's going to be exactly like my book, you're going to be disappointed because I mean, it shouldn't be, should it really? Because as you were saying, readers interact with the narrative on the page completely differently than the way people will interact with it in a film theatre. So I think you have to go into it knowing that the film or the play is going to sit alongside your novel rather than be a replica of it. It's not going to be a twin, it's going to be a sibling, maybe even a cousin. And you have to embrace that, and know that. And I was so thrilled when Chloe came on board because I knew that she was never going to make a kind of pristine antiseptic costume drama, And I love the fact that everybody on screen looks kind of filthy. You often see Jesse or Paul's hands and their fingernails are black. And I think that's perfect. And the clothes don't, they were all very carefully stitched and handmade. And then there was a special room where they basically just beat them up and they hit them with chains. And I mean, literally, they hit them with chains and branches and made them really filthy. And, and I love that because that's exactly as it should be. But I also knew that Chloe wasn't going to come at the story in a kind of idolatrous way. She wasn't going to make an idolatrous film about Shakespeare, and that she was also not going to put him center stage, which I think other directors might have done. Um, and I didn't want that because there are many films about that. We've already made Shakespeare in Love; it already exists. We don't need to remake it.
Well, I'll admit I saw this. It was probably my 20th movie at the Toronto Film Festival, and I knew the title. I knew Chloe was involved. I knew something to do with Shakespeare, but I didn't know anything more than that. And I was actually impressed because I don't think, if I remember correctly, I think Joe at one point says Shakespeare like almost at the end
Yeah,
of the film, and
once
that's
it's
the
the
first
yeah,
mention we
wins.
get. And I thought that was really cool because it lives as its own story that you don't even obviously you should have, if you've lived and experienced any of Shakespeare, you should have some concept, but otherwise I like that that's sort of buried in there at the very, towards the very
Yeah.
end.
Well, that comes from the book. He's not named in the book at all. The word Shakespeare doesn't appear in the novel, partly because I just found it's quite distracting, I think. And as a novel, as I was writing it, I found that I couldn't write a sentence like, William Shakespeare walked up the path and knocked on the door. It just seemed ridiculous. And I thought if I can't stay submerged in the narrative, I can't expect readers to. Um, his name has sort of become larger than himself, hasn't it? It become, it's an adjective almost to describe a time in history or particular types of drama or language, or it sort of become divorced from him. So, and the story is very much about names. It's the fact that Hamnet's name is so recognizable to us, and that the woman we know as Anne Hathaway was actually her actual name was Agnes, according to her father. So it's a lot of about names and misnaming, and you getting divorced from your name.
Are there any other key differences between the book and the film?
Well, I think there was a lot we had to cut out, clearly, because it's quite a long novel. But I think the biggest difference for me, and I think it's a wonderful difference, is the final sequence in the Globe Theatre. Because in the novel, that's quite telescoped down, because, on the page, you can't replicate to be or not to be, and you can't replicate all these long, undigested speeches from Shakespeare. So to see it kind of almost, I mean, it was a lot longer, but to see actual, the actors acting it out and to hear a lot more of the play, to see a lot more of the play is fantastic. And it always fills my heart with joy because I've always thought if I could build a time machine to go anywhere, that's where I'd want to go, to the Globe, to watch the first production of Hamlet. I mean, who wouldn't really?
I also had a great conversation with Max Richter about his own involvement in that final scene, and I think the
Yeah.
music is so incredible. I'm
Yeah.
curious when you've seen the film with people because I feel like every audience, people are just like sobbing and it's very, very intense.
It is. I know it's quite it is quite, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you think, I wrote the book and I redrafted the book a million times, and I wrote screenplay and I was on set and I've seen the edits. Every time I start watching it, I think I'm not going to cry this time. Come on, and then absolutely in tears, every single time I can't not cry, which is a bit ridiculous, really. Um, yeah, it's amazing. I think I was very surprised. Actually, in London, I was quite surprised at how people found the first sort of third, maybe a quarter, very funny. And I thought, oh wow, people are laughing because I sort of you become slightly detached from that when you know it inside out. So that was really lovely to hear.
And you have another one of your books is going to be a film soon, correct?
You never know, but yes, it's in the pipeline. Yeah.
What can you share about that? What kind of expectations should audiences have for it?
Well, it's quite exciting. Audrey Dewan is going to direct it, and it's called Marriage Portrait. And she is writing. In fact, I had a Zoom with her only last week, and she's writing the script in French, and then it's going to be translated to English. So I haven't actually seen because I don't read French. I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, it's going to be. It's very exciting. She's got lots of interesting ideas for it, and yeah, so I'm really. It's going to be really interesting to have the whole experience again in a different way.
Did you ever imagine these two works being adapted? And do you think that will change how you write going forward? The possibility that now that this has taken off so much, this would likely happen again?
I don't, I mean, who knows? You never know. It is very, I never really thought, even, you get close to, I know friends of mine who've, their movie's about to be made and then it all falls apart. So even when Hamnet was kind of going into production and pre-production, I kept thinking, it may not happen, it may not happen. And then I was on set and I had to FaceTime my husband. I was actually standing in the middle of the reconstructed globe and he said to me, he said, "Do you admit now that it's happening?" And I said, "Actually, okay, fine. I admit it now. I'm standing in the globe. Paul Mescal's about to come on stage. Yes, I admit it. It is happening. So it is a bit of a, you never quite know. And you just have to go into it thinking, I'll just go along for the ride, and what happens will happen.
Well, while all of us are so, emotionally impacted by this film, what have you seen recently that really stuck with you?
Oh, well, actually, there's a Scottish film called I Swear, which is absolutely brilliant. It's a true story about a young man with Tourette's, and I really love that. And I watched something on Netflix last night called I Used to Be Funny, which I thought was brilliant. Yeah.
That is, and that Rachel Sennett does all this comedy stuff, and to me it's like
Yeah.
that came out at the same time around Bottoms, and I thought it was going to be a huge thing, and she sort of stayed with the comedy, but I think she is exceptional in that film, and
He's
more people should
amazing
see
in the
it.
film. And it's quite shocking because you sort of see something and then you don't really know what's happening. I thought it was really beautiful and amazing the relationship between Rachel Sennett character and the young teenage girl. It's a very interesting depiction of trauma and what it does to different people. And yeah, I thought it was wonderful. I watched it in the middle of the night because I was jet lagged and I thought it was fantastic.
Well, I have to check. I've heard of I Swear, but I haven't had a chance to see it yet, so I'll
Oh,
add
it's
that one to my
wonderful.
list.
Really wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Maggie. While you have doubts, I have few doubts that we'll speak again. I think there's going to be a lot of cinematic success ahead for you, and I thank
Oh,
you so much.
thank you. See you later.